There are few things more frustrating than getting started with sublimation, being excited about all the things you can make, only to have them all just not turn out. I first started sublimation about a year ago, and it really took me a solid 6 months of trial and error to really get the hang of it. And I wanted to make this video for you so you can sort of streamline that process and make sure that you have all the information you need to avoid as many mistakes as possible. In this video, I'm gonna walk through 5 things to troubleshoot if you are having issues with your prints. So if you're looking for a breakdown of exactly what you should do to fix the issues that you're having, hit subscribe and let's get started. So the biggest, most important thing that you need to make sure you're doing is using the correct sublimation equipment and supplies. When I talk about sublimation supplies, I mean the blanks that you are using. Later, I am going to talk about the equipment and checking your equipment, but first you just need to make sure that you're using things designed for sublimation. So a sublimation printer, a sublimation paper, sublimation ink, and blanks made for sublimation. You can't just go to any store and buy things to sublimate on. Now, some things you can sublimate on, but not everything is made for sublimation. So you need to make sure that you're purchasing blanks, whether it's tumblers, mugs, keychains, accessories of any kind that are specifically designed for sublimation. I would definitely check out the PROWORLD website. They have a huge variety of every kind of sublimation blank that you could possibly need along with equipment. I'm also going to put underneath this video my free checklist, a PDF download of things that you need to get started. So if you're still in that research phase, I have that outlined for you so you can know exactly where to start. So if you're having issues with your sublimation, make sure your blanks are actually made for sublimation. So the second thing that we are going to troubleshoot are your printer settings and your computer settings. And these are going to tie into any weirdness with your colors. If you're feeling like they're just off, like personally, when I would print reds and yellows or golds on my Epson printer, it would just look wrong. Like it just wasn't the right color. The reds were a little bit orangey. Yellows and golds were like also kind of a little orangey. Like they just weren't the colors that I needed them to be. So I'm going to show you on your computer sort of where to look to make sure your settings are correct. Press the Windows key and I'm going to type in printers and scanners. And there I'm going to see my Epson EcoTank. You can search through this. If you have a Mac, it's going to be a little bit different. And here I'm going to click Manage. And then I'm going to go to Printer Properties. The goal is to get to the printing preferences. And from here, I want to turn on borderless printing. I want to choose Premium Presentation Paper Matte and change it to high quality. And then I'm going to go over to more options and I'm going to make sure that I have this mirror image check. And then the last thing you're going to do is go to color correction and go to advanced. And you're going to choose Adobe RGB and the gamma at 2.2. This is specifically if you have an Epson printer that has been converted for sublimation, because you don't really have to go through this process if you have a Sawgrass printer. If you are still having trouble with fixing the computer settings and the printer settings, reach out to the manufacturer of your ink. They might be able to share an ICC profile or help walk you through what works best for their inks. I have recently upgraded to my Sawgrass and I've had 0 issues and had to do 0 tweaking to any color situation. It just works automatically with the design of the printer and the ink and the software that you print with. So if you're continually having issues, definitely see about upgrading to a printer actually made for sublimation, not one that you have converted. I really am obsessed with my SG-1000, so I have the bigger print bed and just all of the issues that I used to have are non-existent. And the other thing with the computer is that you need to make sure that you're mirroring your image. When you print it on your sublimation paper, it should be backwards. When you actually add the design to whatever you're sublimating, it will come out the right way. So if when you're doing your sublimation, all of your prints are backwards, it's because you're forgetting to mirror your design. The third thing I want to troubleshoot here with you is a dull or not vibrant image after you press. Now, once you print your design, your image will look faded. It doesn't look the way on the paper that it looks after you press it, so that's normal. If it looks dull and the colors don't look perfect on the paper, that's completely normal. But after you press it, if it's looking kind of dull or not that vibrant, there are 3 things that you need to check. If they are dull and not vibrant, it is likely that it is one or all of the next three things: too much pressure, too much heat, and too much time. So it might seem a little bit backwards, but if you have too much pressure, too much heat, or too much time, it can cause your image to fade. One tough thing about sublimation is that every press and every blank is a little bit different. So your time, temperature, and pressure might be a little bit different than the recommendations. But when you buy your blanks, look at what the manufacturer recommends. They should be telling you the recommended temperature and time as well as pressure for their item. If wherever you're buying from doesn't actually include that, you can Google or look at other websites that may have that information for you, and that is your baseline. Unfortunately, there is a little bit of trial and error here depending on your setup, but once you kind of figure it out, it is pretty consistent after that. I keep a note in my phone of the sublimation items that I commonly do. So in there it says my tumblers are gonna go at 385 for about 75 seconds, and my mugs are at 400 for 240 seconds. And after some trial and error, I have figured that out based on the equipment that I use. The next issue that comes up is ghosting. Now, this sort of is twofold depending on what you're trying to sublimate. Ghosting happens when your image moves in the middle of pressing. Basically, if you were to press it somewhere and it moved and then it continued to press in a different spot, you're gonna have that kind of ghosting look where you have two of your design. Where this comes up most for me is in sublimation tumblers around the top or around the bottom. So you wanna make sure that you're taping your designs in place. And for tumblers, I really like to make sure that my design isn't longer than my tumbler, because if the paper starts to fold around the bottom of the tumbler, that's where a lot of ghosting will happen. So to prevent ghosting, you need to make sure that your design is taped and ready to go, and that your paper size is fitting your blank. And if you're continually having issues with your tumblers, I'm gonna link a video right now with a full tutorial on how to do a sublimation tumbler with my mug press, because that's really the only way I've been able to get very consistent, really good looking tumblers is with my mug and tumbler press, not with the convection oven. Although plenty of people make that work, you just need to make sure that your image is tight and it is not moving once you put it in your press or in your oven. The next issue that comes up a lot are blurry prints. And just like that dull, vibrant kind of situation, it will come back to the time and the temperature that you are using. I have had sort of ink bleeding, blurriness with too much time and too much heat. So try to scale that back a little for what works with your press and the blanks that you are using. And I know, like with a lot of this, it really does take trial and error, but it always really comes down to the time, the pressure, and the temperature. So you have to know that you will be doing a little bit of trial and error before you find the right fit. But the manufacturer recommendations are really the best place to start. The last thing I want to troubleshoot is your actual sublimation equipment. Like I said earlier, this is the thing that really was making me have so many issues. And I didn't really realize that that would be the problem. I was like, yeah, I have a heat press. Yeah, I have a convection oven. Why isn't this working? I want to walk through some of the things that you can do to check your equipment, because you might need to upgrade to get those consistent, high quality prints. So the first thing that I realized was I was using an old Amazon heat press. And you know what? It served me well for a lot of years. And while it worked really well for heat transfer vinyl and apparel, it was not giving me the end product that I needed for sublimation. And here's what I figured out. I took my little temperature gun that I used to actually make candles, and I decided to measure the temperature in the four corners and in the middle of my heat press. They were completely off. Not only were they not the temperature that it said it was, each corner was a little bit different, like 5 to 10 degrees off. So the heat plate was very, very inconsistent, and it just wasn't good enough for the sublimation. So if you have an older heat press, that is something you should check out, and you might need to adjust the temperature. If you know it's gonna be 10 degrees colder, then you need to put it 10 degrees hotter. It's just something you have to play around with, or you can upgrade to a new better working, higher quality heat press. I hands down recommend my Trans Pro Plus heat press, and I will put a video of my review on that. But ever since I upgraded, all of the things I sublimate on in terms of like shirts or flat items are so much better. And I am wasting way less blanks and time and energy trying to get them right, because the issue was my press, not what I was doing personally. This same energy kind of goes for the convection oven or the tumbler press. Now, I used a convection oven when I first started because it was less expensive. You can kind of take the same temperature reader and figure out the temperature of your convection oven. I found it really hard to get the right pressure when I was using the oven on my mugs and on my tumblers. So I did use these silicone bands that really did help, but they are really kind of annoying to put on and just time consuming to prepare your stuff to put in the oven. So the actual prep of your items before it gets into the oven may need to be updated if you're getting that ghosting or kind of like dull, not vibrant print on your tumbler or whatever you're putting in your oven. But the main thing is to check that you are getting the correct temperatures when you turn it on and adjust accordingly. What I like about using the tumbler press, and I have a whole video comparing my oven versus press, is I get much more consistent pressure and temperatures. So I really avoid a lot of those issues once I upgraded to that tumbler press. And the last piece of equipment that you need to make sure is functioning properly is your printer. Make sure that you are keeping it clean, keeping it running so you don't get any clogs, which can cause like streaks or lines in your finish, and it kind of goes back to that initial thing that we talked about on your computer. You know, we need to make sure all of the settings are correct to get things going the way you want them to look. Now, again, I said it before and I'll say it again, I absolutely love my Sawgrass printer. It has relieved a lot of the headache in terms of setting up in the computer settings, but I also really like that once I got that Sawgrass for free, I was able to talk to one of their representatives to make sure that it was set up correctly. They really do support you through the setup process, so if that's something that scares you, that might be a reason why you would go with your printer. So hopefully if you go through all of these troubleshooting items, you will start seeing improvements on your prints. Now, mistakes do happen. Not everything's gonna turn out, and specifically with tumblers, if you have any messed up sublimation tumblers, I wanna show you in the next video what you can do to still use them and not just throw them in the garbage. So watch the next video on your screen if you wanna know what you can do with your messed up sublimation tumblers.